Poor girl is barred from the company party. Even the owner shows up and says, without her, none of this would exist. And what he did in front of everyone. Even moved the security guards. She was trembling. Wearing a simple dress sewn by her own mother, Maria tried to smile as security guards blocked her from entering the company gala. All eyes were on her. The waiters whispered. Some women snickered. A manager remarked loudly, "She must be lost, or looking for free food." Shame burned on her face. She couldn't explain that she was an employee. No one believed her. When she tried to show her badge, it was snatched from her hand. And before she could defend herself, one of the company directors approached with a false smile and announced, "Sorry, dear. This event is for employees, not for cleaning guests." That's when the glass gate opened with a sharp click, and the company owner himself entered, stopped everything with a gesture, looked her in the eye, and said something that even made the security guards lower their heads. Without her, none of this would exist. Those 6 words echoed throughout the room, shattering the background music and making glasses tremble in the hands of the suited elite. The most powerful man in the company descended the steps, his eyes fixed on her. His every step felt like a sentence to those who had mocked her. "She's not a cleaning lady, nor a guest. She's the reason we're here today." Absolute silence. He took her hand, lifted it into bow, the air, and added, "While many here fawned over me, she was the one who gave me a plate of food when I lost everything. She was the one who believed when I didn't even believe anymore." Maria felt her legs weaken but remained firm. The entire room watched, stunned, the complete reversal of power. And then what he did in front of everyone moved even the security guards. Before continuing, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and like this video so you can continue receiving our real stories. Thank you very much. The company's ballroom gleamed like a showcase of power. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, reflecting off the champagne flutes, and the guests, draped in sparkling gowns and Italian suits, strutted as if every step were a spectacle. It was the annual party for Bloomtech, the technology giant that in just 10 years had transformed into an empire. At the main entrance, the red carpet was more symbolic than functional. It served as a cut-off line. Only the chosen ones passed. Inside, background music mingled with conversations about investments, mergers, and international travel. In one corner, the partners huddled together, laughing loudly over an anecdote involving a winery purchase. In another, the HR manager commented to the marketing director about the kind of person who ruins the company's aesthetic, referring to the new finance intern who had dared to arrive in a non-standard Armani dress. The entire space vibrated with a collective sense of importance, where one's worth was measured by the brand of their watch or their fluency in naming billionaires. And it was into this world of facades that Maria arrived. With discreet steps and a hesitant look, she entered the lobby, wearing a navy blue dress sewn by her mother, dull shoes and an ID badge attached with a simple lanyard. She smiled at the receptionist, but the smile wasn't returned. When she tried to approach the main entrance, 2 security guards blocked her way. "Guests only," one of them said. She showed her badge. "I'm an employee, accounting analyst." The security guard looked at her dismissively, muttered something into the radio, and shook his head. "Sorry, this area is restricted. You must have the wrong entrance." Trying to remain calm, Maria explained that she had received the email from HR, that it was on the list, that... But no one was listening. The people in the line behind her were getting impatient, and a woman said loudly, "Poor thing, she must think this is a charity ball." Laughter spread, and more people approached, curious about the scene. That's when Brian Hallman, the director of operations, appeared. Tall, arrogant, and with a glass of whiskey in his hand, he looked her up and down. "You work here?" he asked mockingly. She nodded, almost whispering. He took her badge from her hand, pretended to read it, and tossed it back to her. "Honey, this event isn't for interns who just came from cleaning. Those kinds of people distract you." And as if that weren't enough, he turned to the guests and said in a very audible tone, "You know how it is. Every company has its share of charity." The humiliation was total. Maria stood there, frozen, trying to control the tears that threatened to fall. Her breathing quickened, her eyes searching for an escape, but her feet wouldn't obey. No one intervened. No one even looked at her with compassion. It was as if, in this luxurious place, she were a glitch in the system, an intruder in the world of the perfect, until amidst the hubbub, a sudden silence fell. The glass door burst open, and everyone turned at once. An imposing figure entered, wearing a dark grey suit, unsmiling, unhurried. It was Richard Bloom, the CEO, the founder, the man who had created it all from scratch. His gaze swept the room until he found Maria. And then, with firm steps, he began to make his way through the crowd. The tension in the air was as palpable as the expensive perfume wafting among the guests. No one knew what he would do, but everyone knew that this night was about to change. Maria couldn't understand how that moment had become so painful. She had prepared for weeks. She remembered the excitement she had felt when she received the email from HR with the invitation. Her mother, with teary eyes, had promised to sew the blue dress she had dreamed of, the same fabric that had been kept for years at the bottom of a box, waiting for a special occasion. And now, there, in front of dozens of people who treated her like a mistake, Maria felt all her effort, all her hope being ripped away along with her dignity. Still, she remained standing. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just stared at the floor, clutching her badge lanyard between her fingers, as if it were the only thing keeping her present. Richard Bloom stood before her. He didn't say a word for a few seconds. He simply stared at her, with the grave gaze of someone recognizing something no one else sees. And then, as if no one else in the room existed, he took the microphone from one of the musicians, looked up at the crowd and said, in a voice that cut through the air like a blade, "Without her, none of this would exist." The entire room froze. Brian Holman choked on his whiskey. The ambient sound was muted. The security guards looked at each other, unsure whether to retreat or kneel. Richard continued, 2 years ago, when I was at my lowest point, with no identity, no money, no purpose, this woman gave me what no one else had the courage to offer: food, silence, and respect. The guests looked at each other, confused. I was dirty, tired, ignored on the streets of Austin. Everyone walked right past me, except her. She shared her lunch with me and said, "It doesn't matter who you were. It matters who you can be again." Maria finally looked up. She was shocked. She did remember that man, a shabbily dressed man, with a lost look in his eyes, sitting near the laundromat where she worked, part-time. But she never imagined he would be him. That day, Richard continued, she gave me a reason to try again. I returned to the company. I rebuilt. And today, if we have this empire, this event, this fortune, it's because someone with nothing believed in me. The silence gave way to whispers, then to awkward glances. Director Holman tried to move away discreetly, but everyone's eyes were now fixed on him. Richard turned to Maria and, in a symbolic gesture, removed his own gold CEO fouage and hung it around her neck. Today you own this place more than any of us. Maria could barely breathe. The world was spinning. That girl who had grown up amidst sewing and overdue bills had just been honored in front of the very people who had despised her. And what he did next moved even the security guards. Richard knelt and kissed her hand. Not as a romantic act, but as a public apology, a silent acknowledgement. And at that moment, it wasn't the rich who applauded first. It was the waiters, then the technicians, then the security guard at the door. And soon the entire room was on its feet, applauding a woman who wasn't made of luxury but of dignity. And no one, absolutely no one, dared laugh at her now. It all began a few weeks before that fateful night. The party was the culmination of a month of tension within Bloomtech. The new project, called Aurora, promised to revolutionize the financial intelligence market, and the CEO would announce the names of key collaborators. During the gala, for many it would be a moment to reap the rewards, for others just another night of flattery and showmanship, but for Brian Holman it was a stage, and he wanted the spotlight all to himself. One afternoon in the boardroom, surrounded by his favorite executives, he made a cruel bet. If anyone can guess how many junior staff like cleaners, warehouse staff, interns will try to show up to the event in thrift store clothes, I'll buy them dinner at Chez Marceau. Laughter erupted. A director suggested, let's award the worst-dressed person of the night. Brian chortled, oh, let's call it the fashion cleaning trophy. They applauded as if it were genius. Someone asked if this wouldn't be risky. Brian replied dismissively, do you think anyone will care? They're invisible. If they get in, it's because someone slept on the job. And it was in this atmosphere of sadistic gambling that he decided to install extra filters at the reception desk with clear instructions. Anyone who seemed out of place, whether due to clothing, accent, or insecurity, was to be barred unless authorized by someone from senior management. There was no list. There was visual judgment, an elitism scanner. Maria, unfortunately, was spotted by him during a coffee break a few days before the event. She was holding a report, wearing simple glasses, her hair tied back with a scrunchie, and no makeup. Brian commented to another manager, that one's a trophy contender. She'll show up in a cheap velvet dress. And then came the cruelest bet. Wanna see? On the day of the party, I'll tear off her name tag myself in front of everyone. It'll be hilarious. The other asked, but what if she really is an employee? Brian responded with a laugh. Even better, you'll learn the difference between being on the payroll and being at the top. The laughter was followed by a toast laced with contempt. None of them knew that the woman they planned to ridicule was the silent thread that held part of the company together. She reviewed forgotten accounts, corrected errors no one saw, and above all, did it all with an honesty that wouldn't sell for bonuses or flattery. In Brian's mind, it was all a spectacle. He didn't know that by staging this public humiliation, he would be opening the curtain on his own judgment. Nor did he imagine that the man who would return to the company headquarters days later, to applause, would be the same beggar he'd never recognized. The stage was set, the bet was made. And the audience? They were just waiting for the next act. It was an autumn afternoon in Austin, with reddish leaves dancing in the wind along the sidewalks of the industrial zone. Maria was coming off another double shift at the community laundry, where she worked Saturday mornings to supplement her income while studying accounting at night. She carried in her backpack a snack her mother had lovingly prepared, cornbread, shredded chicken, and a small piece of carrot cake. Nothing fancy, but enough to nourish the soul. As she turned the corner onto 11th Street, she saw a man sitting next to a dumpster, hunched over, his clothes dirty, his face covered in stubble. He didn't extend his hand, didn't ask for anything. He just stared at the ground, motionless as if he were slowly disappearing. Most people looked away. A couple crossed the street to avoid him. Maria, on the other hand, stopped. Her heart sank. She approached slowly, took the snack from her backpack, squatted down and said, "Are you hungry, mister?" The man looked at her as if he no longer knew what kindness meant. His eyes were watering, but he tried to hide them. She held out the package, and he hesitated, but took it. "It's chicken. My mom made it. It's still warm." He nodded in silent gratitude and lifted the sandwich to his mouth. He ate slowly, as if each bite were sacred. Maria didn't ask his name. She didn't question his reason for being there. She simply sat beside him for a few minutes in silence. "There are places that help with showers and clean clothes over there on 4th Avenue, if you want to go." He only murmured his answer, but seemed to hold every word. When she stood to leave, he looked her in the eye for the first time and said, his voice hoarse, "You're the first person who's ever seen me." She smiled. "Sometimes that's all that saves us. Being seen." And then he left, never imagining that the man was Richard Bloom, founder of Bloomtech, who had disappeared from the business after a nervous breakdown, a traumatic divorce, and a series of internal betrayals. At the time, everyone thought he was traveling, secluded in some spiritual retreat. No one knew he had spiraled into a deep depression and was wandering the streets trying to find a reason not to disappear completely. Maria didn't know, but that day she had planted something in him. Not hope, yet, but memory. A memory that would return months later, when he decided to reclaim his identity, rediscover his company, and rebuild everything. There was only one face that haunted him, that of the girl who gave him the snack without asking for anything in return. And that was how, unknowingly, she became part of the reason he came back. The night of the party arrived like a parade of egos. Imported cars pulled up one by one in front of the main entrance to Bloomtech headquarters, which had been transformed into a gala ballroom worthy of a movie. Red carpets were rolled out, spotlights swiveled skyward, and photographers were hired to capture the glitter of jewelry and the ostentation of tailored suits. Maria arrived alone, by subway. She walked the last block, carefully holding the hem of her hand-sewn blue dress. On the outside, she seemed calm. Inside, her heart was pounding, as if she knew something was about to happen. As she approached the main entrance, clutching the printed invitation, she heard the first muffled chuckles. Two women from the marketing department stared at her, whispered something, and laughed derisively. One of the security guards looked at her, and without even asking her name, blocked her way. "Excuse me, miss, this entrance is for guests of the board of directors." She showed him the invitation. "I'm a collaborator, you're here, my name is Maria." "It doesn't matter," the man interrupted. "The instructions I received are to filter out anyone who isn't up to par." Up to par. Those words echoed like a sentence. Maria tried to argue, but she had already attracted too much attention. A small circle of people formed, some hiding their mockery with glasses in their hands, others discreetly recording with their cell phones. Brian Holman appeared in the center of the scene, as if he were the conductor of this spectacle. "What's going on here?" he asked theatrically, as if surprised. When he saw Maria, he feigned confusion. "You work here?" She nodded shyly. "I'm in the controller's office." He grimaced, cynically took the badge hanging from her neck and twirled it in the air. "Interesting, such a simple badge. This can be forged at any stationery store." Laughter erupted all around. Maria swallowed hard. "Brian, I got the invitation." "Honey, this isn't a charity event, understand?" He turned to the guests and held up his badge like a trophy. "Our winner of the fashion cleaning trophy." The audience laughed. Someone applauded mockingly. Maria felt her legs weaken, but she refused to cry. She was there in front of everyone, with her simple dress, sweaty hands, and her dignity in tatters. A woman from HR whispered something in Brian's ear, and he shrugged and replied, "So she really works here? Patience, that doesn't mean she should come in." And with a gesture, he ordered the security guards to block the way. The glass door moved like a permanent barrier. Maria stood outside, under the lights that didn't illuminate, they only exposed. Inside, the music resumed. The laughter returned. The night went on, and she stood there for a few moments, heartbroken, face raised, soul trying to cling to what little was left. But fate, silent and implacable, was already preparing its answer, an answer that would come loudly and would change everything. Maria didn't return home that night. She sat alone on a bench a few feet away, where the party lights shone like distant fireworks, and listened to the city breathe. Beside her lay the crumpled invitation and the name tag she had sewn. Onto the cord. She was silent, but something inside her was beginning to break, and it wasn't sadness. It was clarity. She had been humiliated, treated like trash, and all for what? Because she dared to believe she deserved to be there. Because she forgot that for the dignified people in that room, kindness was still mistaken for weakness. She stayed awake all night. She returned home at dawn, and when she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw the submissive girl she had been before. She saw the woman who had endured everything without losing her clear gaze. The next day she didn't go to work, but not out of shame. She wanted to see how far everyone's silence would go. No emails, no calls, no apologies. Until 2 days later, Richard Bloom sought her out. She was called to the top-floor conference room where he waited alone, without security, without sycophants. When he saw her enter, he immediately stood. "Maria." She didn't answer. She sat calmly across from him, her eyes fixed, as if she had nothing left to fear. He took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize. For everything. For what you went through. For what they did to you. I didn't know." Yes, I did, she interrupted, her voice calm. You knew the kind of culture you fostered in here. You knew who Brian is. You knew what that event meant, and you knew that people like me were never meant to be at the center. But I was. Richard swallowed. She continued. But don't worry. I didn't come here to demand anything. I just wanted to look you in the eyes and tell you that I remember. He looked at her, confused. She rested her hands on the table. I remember the day I gave you that sandwich. You were dirty, exhausted, almost unrecognizable. But I saw you. And now I know you saw me too. The difference is I didn't need a badge, a suit, or a title to treat you like a human being. The silence between them was heavier than any accusation. She stood. I knew who you were the moment I saw your photo on the intranet, months after I joined Bloomtech. I never told anyone, I never held you accountable, because I didn't do it expecting anything. But knowing I was treated like a nuisance by a company founded by someone who was once ignored, that hurt more than what Brian did. Richard tried to speak, but she raised her hand and cut him off. You don't need to say anything. Enough was said that night. And then, before leaving, she paused at the door and added, but still, thank you, because now I see who people really are when they're at the top. She left. She didn't look back. And in that moment, without shouting, without revenge, without scandal, Maria had risen higher than anyone in that company. Because she knew. She always knew. Richard sat in the conference room for a long time after Maria left. The silence felt heavier than any board meeting, colder than any drop in the company's stock. For the first time in years, there were no numbers, no spreadsheets, no strategies to guide him. There was only this truth: he had failed as a man, even if he had succeeded as CEO. In the days that followed, her image stuck in his mind. It wasn't just her face, it was her gesture, the gesture of someone who helped him when no one else recognized him. And, even crueler, was the realization that he had forgotten her too. He searched the company's files for her hiring history. He wanted to know more. He needed to. That's when he found her full name, Maria Cristina de Los Angeles. As he typed it into the system, something caught his eye. The hiring address matched the exact same street he'd wandered 2 years earlier, near the laundromat where he'd survived for months, eating scraps, sleeping under boxes. It rekindled memories that had been erased by the trauma. He began pulling out reports, sifting through old photos, checking security cameras from the time, until he found it. A video. Himself, dirty, sitting next to a trash can. And then, her. She appeared with her backpack on, approached with a small smile, and held out a package of food. Richard paused the video. It hit him like a punch in the gut. It wasn't just a memory. It was the only time anyone had treated him like a person during all that hell. He returned to the report. He discovered that Maria had joined the company through a regional inclusion process, with a student scholarship sponsored by one of Bloomtech's internal programs, a program he himself had signed up for years ago, but which was rarely mentioned by management. She was a scholarship student, an intern, and then promoted based on merit, without recommendation, without favor. Every step she had climbed had been through silent effort. He continued investigating. He discovered that she was the one who corrected a serious cash flow flaw in the Latin American expansion, a flaw that would have cost millions. But her name was never mentioned in the public announcement. The credit went to the compliance department. And, bitterly ironically, Brian. Holman. The penny dropped like an avalanche. She wasn't just an exemplary employee. She was part of the invisible foundation of it all. Without her, poor decisions would have led to the company's collapse. Without her, he might never have returned, because he wouldn't have survived long enough to try. That hurt more than the contempt he saw on the faces of others. He realized that deep down, he had never forgotten her. He had simply erased it to avoid the shame. But now, upon rediscovering that video, that street, that look, the memory was no longer a burden, it was a debt. And he knew this debt wasn't repaid with money, it was repaid with truth and with repentance. The morning after the discovery, Richard summoned Maria, but the HR department's response was short and curt. She has resigned voluntarily. There was no letter, there was no farewell. just a succinct 3-line email. "Thank you for the opportunity, but my time here is over. Sincerely, Maria Cristina." He remained silent. He read and reread the text as if trying to find subtext that doesn't exist. He contacted her direct manager. No one knew where she had gone. Some said she had simply disappeared. Others that she didn't give any explanation. But Richard knew she hadn't disappeared out of carelessness. She left because she no longer needed to be there, and because, deep down, she had already said everything that needed to be said. The days passed, and Bloomtech headquarters felt colder. Not because of the air conditioning, but because something essential had left through the door. An invisible thread of humanity, of integrity, of silence that sustains structures without asking for applause. And for the first time, Richard began to notice. Notice that the meetings were filled with empty voices, that the reports were accurate but soulless, that the smiles in the hallways were nothing more than well-rehearsed masks. Even the coffee seemed to have lost its flavor. He tried to follow his routine, but Maria's face kept popping up in the most unexpected places. At the back of the elevator, at the desk where she used to work, in the delicate handwriting of forgotten sketchbooks. He began to wonder where she was. Had she gone back to the laundromat? Did she work somewhere else? More just, more humane. He searched social media. No clue. Her name seemed to have vanished. A gentle ghost who had passed through his life, leaving everything clearer, including his own conscience. But now, absent, her absence screams. He thought about her at night. He remembered the shared snack, the gesture without questions, the look without judgment. He realized that, all along, the one person who hadn't wanted anything from him was the one who had given him the most. He began to rethink the company's values. He cancelled parties. He created anonymous recognition programs. He quietly fired Brian Holman, citing ethical alignment. But none of this filled the void she had left. And then, one day he went down to the storage room on impulse. He'd never been there before. He walked through the silent hallways until he found an old bookshelf filled with boxes of physical files. In one of them, he found a simple notebook with a blue cover. It was hers. Inside were notes of calculations, drafts of reports, but also something else. Loose sentences written at the bottom of the pages. Short reflections, scribbles with ideas for social projects, suggestions for improving the organizational climate. And on one of the pages, a highlighted sentence. "Those at the top don't always know what sustains the base." He closed the notebook, his hands trembling. Her absence wasn't just physical, it was a mirror. And he, for the first time, saw his own reflection without a frame. And he didn't like what he saw. Maria's absence was like a thread pulled from a seemingly perfect fabric. At first, almost no one noticed. But gradually, Bloomtech's seams began to unravel, revealing what lay beneath. The shine. An intern discreetly posted a photo of the humiliation at the party entrance on social media. She was an employee, and she was treated like trash. Within hours, the video spread. Comments exploded. At first, the company's defenders tried to suppress it, claiming there was a misunderstanding. But other testimonies soon emerged. Former employees who had experienced similar situations, instances of veiled harassment, institutional elitism, tasteless jokes made by managers in closed meetings. Brian Holman was directly mentioned dozens of times, and even after leaving, the responsibility fell on the person who had kept him at the top for so long, Richard Bloom. Bloomtech's shares began to fluctuate. Investors demanded clarification. A famous influencer reposted the video with the caption, "You are not what you build. You are how you treat those who can't offer you anything." The hashtags Jurja Justiça, Por Maria, and Jurja Bloomtech Desumana became trending topics. Articles appeared in Tatind, national media outlets with headlines like "An example of corporate shame" and "The company that humiliated its own employee." Richard, who had always been shielded by the image of a discreet genius, found himself center stage for the first time. And this time, not because of achievements, but because of a mission. He tried to issue an official statement. It sounded cold. He tried to make a video apology. He was accused of opportunism. Meetings were cancelled. Partnerships were suspended. What had once been a source of pride became a source of questioning. The building's glass walls began to feel like cages. Employees walked in silence, afraid of making headlines. And Richard himself stopped using the private elevator. He took the stairs instead. He avoided the eyes of his co-workers. The weight of his reputation was no longer a trophy. It was a chain. Meanwhile, rumors about Maria spread. Some said she'd gone to work for an NGO. Others said she'd turned down $1 million offer from a rival startup. But the most common whisper among the tables was, she didn't need revenge, she just needed to leave, and that was stronger than any lawsuit. At an internal assembly, one of the oldest employees said aloud, "For years we've heard the speech that people are a company's greatest asset. Now we've discovered that this asset is only valuable if it shines, but what sustains a company are the invisible, and the invisible are leaving." That night, Richard stayed late in the empty headquarters. He walked the dark corridors. He stopped in front of the reception area. He sat on the floor, alone, without a suit, without a title, without the shield of prestige. And for the first time, he understood what it was like to be on the other side of the door. The door that, on that festive night, was slammed shut in the faces of those who most deserved to be inside. Richard Bloom was never the same after that lonely night on the reception floor. That was where she had been barred. That was where, for the first time, he felt small within his own company. In the days that followed, he didn't enter the CEO's office. He walked the floors unannounced, observing everything with new eyes, the eyes of someone who finally saw. The cafeteria, which he had previously passed by, was now where he had coffee with the interns. The cleanliness of the bathrooms, which he had never noticed, now became a reason for personal thanks to each employee in blue uniform. The gold badge he had always worn on his chest was left on his desk. In its place he wore a simple one, with his name printed in black and white like any other employee. He began requesting manual reports from areas he'd previously ignored. He wanted to know who each person on the core team was, who arrived early, who worked beyond their job description, who had never been seen. When he discovered that Maria had suggested 3 improvements to the accounting processes, and none had been heard, he ordered them implemented immediately, with her name as a reference in the internal system. He created a silent fund in her name, the Christina program, to finance the training of young, low-income women in technology. But he made a point of not announcing it at press conferences or using it as marketing material. Justice isn't publicity. It's silent repair, he told the board. He also began reviewing internal policies. He cut lavish events, replacing them with mentoring programs. He created an anonymous channel for reporting toxic culture. Executive meetings began with 5 minutes of silence. "To remind you that ego is not an argument," he said. And more than that, he began to listen, truly listen. One afternoon, he found an old notebook in his home. It was the one he'd carried during his time on the streets. The pages were crumpled, some rain-stained, others scribbled with random sentences, drawings, and confused thoughts. And there, in a corner, was something written in shaky handwriting. "If I ever return, I want to remember what kept me alive, a sandwich and a look." Richard closed the notebook with tears in his eyes. He began writing letters, not emails, handwritten letters. One of them was addressed to Maria's mother, even though he didn't know if she still lived at that old address. In it he wrote, "Your daughter saved me twice, once when she gave me food, and once when she gave me a mirror. You created a giant." He didn't expect a reply, but he needed to write, because now he understood that some transformations don't make noise. They don't arrive with newspaper ads or rehearsed posts. They happen when someone is able to admit, "I made a mistake, and I will become a better person because of it." And so, the man who founded a technological empire began to build something even rarer, character. Because sometimes true reconstruction doesn't begin with bricks, but with humility. It was on a grey Saturday in a remote area of San Antonio that fate crossed their paths. Again, Richard wasn't seeking recognition. He had been quietly invited to visit a social project that was beginning to gain notoriety in the region, a support center for young women in vulnerable situations. The invitation came from a former BloomTech employee, now a volunteer, who urged him to see what real impact looks like away from the cameras. The car stopped in front of a renovated warehouse with colorful walls, painted with hopeful phrases, and a small makeshift garden made from reclaimed tires. As soon as Richard entered, he felt a different atmosphere. There was no luxury, but there was human warmth, and something else, a living silence, as if every person there knew the value of being alive. A young woman led him to a room where a basic finance workshop was taking place, and then when the door opened, he stopped. He didn't need to be told. It was her. Standing before a simple chalkboard, her hair tied back in a bun and dressed in jeans and a white t-shirt. Maria taught patiently, explaining compound interest to teenagers who had never held a bank statement. She wrote firmly, smiled tenderly, and seemed fulfilled. She didn't see him right away, but when she finished explaining and turned, her eyes met his. For a moment, everything around her went silent. The past, the pain, the humiliation, the absence, everything concentrated in that gaze. Neither of them moved. It was as if time held its breath. And then he smiled. A fragile, almost shy smile. She, in turn, remained firm. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. At the end of class, Maria left through the back door as she always did. She didn't like grand goodbyes. Richard followed her with measured steps. When he reached her, she was watering a small pot of herbs. "It's rosemary," she said without looking at him. "It survives even in poor soil, but it needs light." He fell silent. He wanted to say 1,000 things, but none seemed enough. Then she turned. "You didn't come here for marketing, did you?" He shook his head. "No." She nodded as if she already knew. "And what do you hope to find?" Richard took a deep breath. "The opportunity to say that I finally understand." She looked at him, this time less harshly. "Understood what?" He replied in a choked voice. "That giving a plate of food is greater than building an empire, and that I never deserved your silence, but you gave it to me anyway." Maria stared at him for long seconds. The wind gently ruffled her hair, and then she said, her voice calm but firm, "I didn't disappear, Richard. I just went to live in a place where respect doesn't need to be demanded, where it's freely given." He lowered his eyes as if receiving a verdict, but before he left, she added, "If you want to learn, there's room here, but not as a savior, as a student." He nodded, and for the first time he didn't feel like a CEO. He felt human. Richard returned the next day, and the next, and the next. He never arrived with fanfare. He helped sweep the entrance, washed the windows, carried boxes. He wore simple t-shirts, sweated in silence, and over time, the teenagers in the project began calling him Mr. Bloom of the cleaning house. He didn't correct them. He enjoyed the irony. Maria watched him from a distance. She never stopped him, but she didn't welcome him right away either. She wanted to see time do what words couldn't, reveal who he was when he didn't need to impress anyone. They spent weeks discreetly together. Sometimes they exchanged glances, other times short sentences. He listened to her lessons as a silent listener, jotting down everything in an old notebook, the same one he used when he walked the streets. He didn't offer to mentor her. He never mentioned his fortune. He simply observed and learned. Until one day, Maria called him to talk in the backyard garden, where she was cultivating small seedlings with her students. The sun was already setting, tinting the sky with golden and pink. "Hyokis, do you think repentance is enough to make amends for what you did?" she asked, without looking at him. "No," he answered sincerely. "I don't think a lifetime is enough, but even so, I have to try." She sat down beside him, pulled out a lavender cutting, and began replanting. "Do you know why I quit without saying goodbye?" He shook his head. "Because if I had, you would have tried to convince me to stay, and I would have said yes, and I would have stayed in a place that always treated me less. And then I would have betrayed myself." Richard clenched his fists but didn't argue. She continued, "And do you know why I never looked for you again, even though I knew who you were?" "Pride," he ventured. "Self-love," she corrected. "Pride is what brought you down. Self-love is what saved me." The silence that followed was thick, but not heavy. It was as if his soul was being washed clean by the gentle harshness of her words. She stood, shook the dirt from her hands, and faced him. "You ask me if I forgive you. The truth is, I already have, not for you, but for myself. Carrying resentment is like holding broken glass, waiting for the other person to bleed." He felt the tears well up, but he didn't let them fall. "Does this mean I can go back?" Maria smiled softly. "No." The word wasn't cruel. It was tender. "You can't go back to what you destroyed, but you can build something new, in another place, in another way, with another truth." She approached, placed a rosemary, cutting in his hands, and said, "Plant this anywhere, and if it grows, you'll remember what survives even in the hardest soil." He held the plant as if it were a relic. It wasn't a bitter goodbye. It was a new beginning. Lonely, yes, but clean. She walked away, heading toward the shed where the light was already coming on. And in that moment, Richard Bloom understood that forgiveness wasn't an invitation back. It was a gentle nudge to move forward, with less ego and more grounded. The camera slowly pans over an empty field on the outskirts of town. The earth is dry, uneven, and scarred by the cracks of time. In the center, a man crouches, digging a small hole with his bare hands. He's dressed in simple clothes, a worn cap, his hair blowing in the wind, his face calm. It's Richard. Beside it, a rosemary seedling. He positions it carefully, as if it were made of crystal. He covers the root with soil, presses gently with his palms, then takes a small bottle of water from his pocket and pours it over the stem. The liquid slowly drips down and disappears into the soil, leaving a dark trail. In the background, the sky begins to darken. A gentle breeze lifts the dust. Richard remains there, kneeling, silent, his head bowed. The world seems suspended in that moment. No words, no sound, just him and the mute woman. Gradually, the camera zooms out. We see that around the rosemary he planted, other small plants are already sprouting. Lavender, basil, sunflowers, signs that others have. Pass through. That someone has been there before, that someone continues to care for it. Richard stands up slowly. He walks alone with firm steps toward the horizon. Without looking back, the rosemary remains. Firm, simple, alive. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched something inside you. So comment below. Even in silence, she won. Only those who watch it all the way through will understand. This helps the video reach more people who need to feel this message. If this story moved you, leave the like now. This shows that it is worth continuing to bring itineraries like this. And subscribe to the channel because every week there are stories like this of poetic justice, transformation, and hidden truths. And now, click on the video that is appearing on the screen. Is another story that will touch your heart. You'll be surprised at what happens in the end. See you then.